Coming up on We Talk News this week, big changes in Major League Baseball on the field and off the field. The Chicago Cubs are the first team to accept a CBD manufacturer as a sponsor. Germany is rewriting its proposed cannabis legalization laws. Washington State is ready to set up interstate commerce. Canadian giant Tilray has acquired its rival Hexo as big weed gets bigger in Canada. And with 420 next week, a new survey shows that cannabis consumers are very aware of what that date means and what impact it might have on their consumption habits. All that and more on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
So for years, we've been doing manufacturing, financial services, medical, and so forth on businesses that stand alone, from doctors' offices to day traders to even small banks. And so when cannabis came along, all of the tools, skills, and miscellaneous that we learned in there, we were able to apply it for them. And for us, it wasn't that big of a problem or a challenge. It worked great. And so they just needed a reporting feature in one software, and luckily that the software company came through for us, came it back, and now it's become the backbone for our offerings, and it's worked out incredibly well.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of We Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto. Our lead story this week comes from the world of sports, specifically Major League Baseball. The Chicago Cubs, one of the oldest and most storied franchises in history, is now being sponsored by a CBD beverage company. MYND is spelled with a Y instead of an I and is based in Chicago. It's a CBD beverage brand, and that beverage will now be available at various concession stands at Wrigley Field. There will be baseline signage, in-game promotions, and the Cubs have also negotiated international exclusive marketing rights for the company. Major League Baseball has allowed clubs to pursue CBD advertising dollars since last year, but this is the first deal to be accepted and announced. Another sign of normalization, perhaps? Peanuts, Cracker Jacks, and wash it down with a CBD beverage called MYND. How about that? Thomas Howard from Cannabis Legalization News has more from Illinois.
What's happening, everybody? It's me, Tom. You can find me at CannabisIndustryLawyer.com, and I'm here with the Illinois update for the week of April 14th, 2023. In Illinois, it will soon be illegal for an officer to have probable cause if they stop you and smell cannabis coming out of your vehicle. This comes from a case that actually was handed down by an Illinois court a couple of years ago and now is going to be codified by two bills working their way through the Illinois legislature, Senate Bill SB 125 and also SB 1886. Since 2020, over 492,000 Illinoisans have been pardoned for low-level cannabis offenses. That's really what's happening in Illinois. Plus, the state is closing in, or has recently passed, $4 billion of legal cannabis sales. And back to you, Elena.
People in the United States are starting to understand and accept the 420 reference for the cannabis industry. In Europe, however, it's a big mystery. So is what's going on in Germany, where momentum for full legalization for adult use has taken a different turn. And Lex Pelger has details from across the pond.
I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creation with this week's European Cannabis Report for We Talk News. In Europe, a time of legislative uncertainty. The big news is in Germany. No details yet, but after EU talks, it may be considering a cannabis light model. This may mean a trial model like its neighbor Switzerland. While disappointing to some activists, many business leaders saw this as inevitable to stay within EU law, and after pushback from neighboring France. The revised bill with the full details is supposed to be submitted soon. In Czech, one of the most liberal cannabis countries in the EU, the government has approved a new drug strategy through 2025. It includes the introduction of a strictly regulated cannabis market. Again, details are supposed to be coming soon. And then finally, in Luxembourg, the country's plan to allow residents to grow 4 cannabis plants is facing pushback from some lawmakers as well as the country's 3 neighbors, who fear it being carried across the border. Advocates argue it's legal under EU law, though not international law, because they would not completely legalize the plant, only allow home consumption under strict rules. That's the European Cannabis Report for this week. For more on the science side, see my newsletter on Substack, Cannabinoids and the People. I'm Lex Pelger from White Whale Creations for Weed Talk News.
Washington State is getting into their interstate commerce discussion with other West Coast states, and now they are ready to deal. Just one of the stories from one of the first states to legalize cannabis over 10 years ago. They are still trying to balance control with an open market, but here's Matthew Friedlander with more on that.
Hello, everyone. Matthew Friedlander coming to you from the owner's office here at Skagit Organics with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. We have had an interesting week here in Washington. Last week, the LCB announced that they found DDT and DDD in some cannabis samples that they determined came from a cluster of licensees in a specific area here in Washington. These farms are located on old apple orchards, and DDT was a common pesticide that was used up until the 1970s. This pesticide obviously has been hanging out in the soil, and as most of us are probably aware, cannabis is a very good soil remediator. But what this means is that the DDT has been getting drawn up into the cannabis material. So the LCB decided to put an administrative hold on 18 licenses, and that effectively meant that 18 businesses were unable to do any business whatsoever. They were given no notice, and the LCB is now considering some emergency rules around this pesticide. It looks like DDT will be added to the list of pesticides tested for here in Washington. And I would imagine that this is going to spread to some other states with legal cannabis as well. On a brighter note, we did get arrest protection passed for medical cannabis patients here in Washington. Before that, they had to rely on affirmative defense, which meant that the cops could come in, destroy a person's garden, and they were presumed guilty until innocent. And then they could go to court and try to prove their innocence. Not really how it should work. So we are very excited. Arrest protection has been passed here in Washington, and it now goes to the governor's office. That's what I got for you this week here in Washington. My name is Matthew Friedlander, reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.
Another month and another sales record for cannabis sales in the state of Missouri. March sales reached over $126 million, and now industry observers believe that state is ready to enter into the billion-dollar world of cannabis. On top of a growing market comes more jobs, as the Show Me state is starting to show the world how the cannabis business is supposed to work. Brandon Jones has more.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones from Beaker and Distribution with the Weekly Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News, sponsored by Baker Brands. That's right. And yes, I'm here in downtown Kansas City where they're setting up for KC Cannabis. It is going to be crazy. People like Kyle Cushman, performances from Mendo Dope, and all of the local dispensaries, cultivators, home growers are all going to be here. And we're right by where the actual NFL draft is going to be. We're on Grand Boulevard and 19th Street in downtown Kansas City. So if you're in the area on Friday or Saturday, you better come down to 19th and Grand and check out the Cannabis. And I can't believe it. Yes, I skipped over the huge story. Missouri sales 125 million. They thought 103 was going to be a record and not to be surpassed. The following month, we topped it with 125 million in sales in just the cannabis space here in Missouri. So Missouri is popping. Kansas City is where events are happening. The next event on 420. If you don't know about it yet, I don't know where you've been. Wiz, Burner, Joey Badass, they're all going to be here. Word on the street, Mike Tyson and Ric Flair themselves are going to be here showing up at the event. There'll be a cannabis village where you can actually consume, and another part of the place where you can buy alcohol, so you cannot mix, but there will be consumption allowed there. You can actually order from the dispensary and have it delivered to the venue, be able to smoke the cannabis that you saw somebody else smoking. Like, man, that smelled good. I want to try that. Go on your app, download the Besame app, push what you want. 20 minutes later, there's going to be a delivery service lined up just like an Uber line where you can just go up, show them your ID, prove that you paid for your purchase, and get your cannabis consumed at the event. So if don't have any plans for 420, you should get out to Kansas City. Again, I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution for the Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Everybody stay educated and medicated. Have a great week.
Brandon Jones, Missouri Cannabis Report is brought to you by Baker Brands, a curated B2B marketplace for head shops and dispensaries.
So, what impact has this acquisition had on Tilray's publicly traded stock? Well, that's why we have Doug Miller from High on Wall Street to explain that to all of us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Weed Talk News. Tilray, they disclosed a $1.2 billion quarterly loss, but they still plan to buy Hexo for $56 million. I do not understand what these companies are doing, but let's go ahead and look at the stock chart. Tilray, they're trading at 248 and it is curling up. So they're doing something right at the moment, but we'll keep an eye on that one. And Hexo, that's around 117. If you remember about a month ago, it was in the 160s and I said it was pulling back to the 140s, but it was looking good and setting up. Well, that news was Tilray buying Hexo. I generally see these things about a month or two before they happen because of the stock charts. And that's exactly what happened. It popped on that news, but then it pulled back to 117 area right now. And it looks like it's going to continue to dip. So I'll keep my eye on it. That's this week's cannabis stock report, reporting for Weed Talk News. I'm Doug Miller.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. We have 3 stories this week from the You Really Can't Do That files to share with you. The first bad example is a continuation to the story we've been reporting on for some months now, the cannabis corruption scandal in which 3 former speakers of the House and 2 former Senate majority leaders have been implicated. Charges have been formally filed against former Speaker Rick Johnson and 3 others for offering or accepting bribes in an influence peddling scheme to advance the licensing of medical cannabis businesses back in 2017 and 2018. All of those 4 men charged have taken plea deals and admitted to their roles in the crime. Johnson was the head of the extremely powerful Marijuana Licensing Board, which filtered out prospective cannabis businesses based on their moral character and perceived fitness to operate a business in the cannabis space. The board was disbanded by Governor Whitmer shortly after she won her election in 2018. Johnson was a lobbyist when he was appointed to the board, but supposedly divested himself from the money part of the industry before taking the chairmanship. The charges are federal and the investigations continue. All experts expect more people to be caught up in the federal net, and we'll keep you updated. The next story is a tale of epic stupidity, which should serve as a lesson to all of us playing on a statewide scale, and maybe a few individuals who have a national audience. Now, here's some friendly cannabis news advice. If you feel like telling a judge that they're a corrupt individual, just don't. Don't. Take the case of a person that the Lansing City Pulse describes as a wannabe marijuana magnate. That's Michael Doherty of Rebel Industries, a Michigan cannabis company. Doherty has a long history of stupidity when it comes to how he conducts himself publicly. In the early years of the cannabis business program, Doherty published a video of himself in front of a table filled with thousands of dollars in cash, bragging about his success and his abilities. Well, last year, his Rebel company was placed in receivership because Doherty didn't meet his financial obligations to his lenders. At that time, Doherty made unkind statements about the legal system passing judgment on him, including some unwarranted attacks on the judge presiding over his case. Well, he made those statements again, but this time it was in a courtroom setting. Doherty was in court to face criminal contempt charges for writing threatening emails to principals in the case, Now, while acting as his own attorney, Doherty refused to take the witness stand when ordered to do so by the judge, then repeatedly called the judge corrupt to her face. Doherty now has 93 days to think about how he could have better phrased his unhappiness as the judge slapped his entitled ass with a contempt of court order and he was led away in handcuffs. You can watch a video of the bad kabuki theater that is Doherty's performance on reporter Todd Haywood's YouTube channel. Now, I'm trying to think, is there any other national figure who makes a regular thing out of calling prosecutors and judges corrupt? I think there's this one guy. In our last Don't Do That segment, we have exclusive brands and their misadventures in cannabis-friendly Gaylord, a Michigan city in the central part of the Lower Peninsula. In a February council meeting, Exclusive was told their operations were not in alignment with city codes. Specifically, their lighting was not in compliance with codes, and they were not to open their store until they fixed that problem. Well, they didn't listen. A little more than 2 weeks later, they opened with the incorrect lighting anyway. But you know how it is when you feel like you can break rules and not have any consequences. You tend to break even more rules. According to reporting by the news outlet The Center Square, Exclusive Brands erected a tent in their parking lot without a permit. They violated the prohibition against using words or images associated with marijuana on their building, and they offered curbside delivery, which is expressly forbidden in Gaylord's ordinance. When your screw-ups number 1, 2, 3, 4, you don't get to play anymore, and the council revoked their license to operate in the city. They were open less than a month. Attorneys for the city expect to plead for a reissuance of their operating license at an April 10 council meeting. Exclusive has 8 other dispensaries across Michigan. And I do have to note the passing of cannabis industry figure Robert Platshorn in Florida. Known as the Black Tuna, Platshorn served more than 30 years in federal prison for being a world-famous drug smuggler. Bobby was an author and a friend, as well as a cannabis entrepreneur who had his own line of products sold through the True Leaf dispensary chain in his home state. Best wishes to his family and friends. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
The race to become the 22nd state in the union to legalize adult use of cannabis in the U.S. is still in a holding pattern. Delaware could have that honor as soon as their governor, John Carney, decides he will sign the bill. However, he's ignoring it right now, which he has the right to do. But it can still become law without his signature, and a press release is expected to announce his plans on Friday, April 14th. Meanwhile, Maryland and Washington, D.C. is where we find Weed Talk News' Andrew Behringer, and here's his report from our nation's capital and neighboring legal state of Maryland.
Hello, my name is Andrew Behringer, and this is the D.C. area report for Weed Talk News. In federal news, another federal court has ruled that it is unconstitutional to ban medical cannabis patients from certain gun rights. As it stands now, if you apply to become a medical cannabis patient in your state, most likely your Second Amendment right will be in jeopardy. Why, you may ask? Primarily, it has to do with cannabis being a Schedule I drug and still federally illegal. Currently, there are 4 ongoing cases at the federal level regarding this topic. You could speculate that these types of laws are creating a new gateway avenue for medical cannabis patients who try to obtain a gun through illegal methods. Now, where have we heard that before? In Virginia news, in a quick one-day return to the Capitol, legislators in Virginia returned to approve some minor amendments from the governor in reference to a hemp bill. These new regulations, for instance, a $1,000 registration fee for all businesses wanting to sell hemp products, will go into effect July 1st. Some people say that these new amendments are only helping big cannabis companies trying to control the industry in the state. Finally, in Maryland news, insert drum roll here. It's official, Maryland. State legislators have approved a cannabis bill that has passed the House and Senate and now awaits the governor's signature. As I stated before, this bill will create the infrastructure and framework for the upcoming adult use market in Maryland, which starts July 1st, 2023. Congratulations, Maryland. You did it. Well done. Well, that's all I have for you in Weed Talk News. My name is Andrew Behringer, and this is the DC Area Report. Don't forget to have a happy 420.
The great state of Texas is getting closer to reforming their cannabis laws, and a major step happened this week when the State House of Representatives passed a bill that will allow cannabis to be used as an opioid alternative for people with chronic pain. Not only will that be allowed, but they are also clearing the way for an increase in THC limitations for the plant grown in the state for their medical program. It was just 2 weeks ago that House of Representative Council approved statewide decriminalization and a plan for expungement of cannabis possession crimes. In Oregon, that state's second largest dispensary chain, LaModa, continues to grow, but a grant for workforce development might have to be rescinded. Marianne Cursetgee has more.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. The story about LaModa, which is the second largest dispensary chain in Oregon, keeps getting bigger. They were initially outed for back taxes of over $3 million. And now a nonprofit recently co-founded by the CEO of LaModa received a $500,000 grant from the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries for workforce training. As it turns out, the nonprofit endeavor planned on training only 4 people with that grant funding. The state has subsequently canceled the grant and has requested all remaining funds to be returned. Next, Real Estate Witch collaborated with Leafly to look at data nationwide and determine which city is best for stoners. Portland, Oregon was the top in terms of access and affordability. And finally, Oregon industry and lobbyists continue to fight for science to be applied to rules related to mold and mycotoxins. In Colorado, for example, irradiation is a common procedure to comply with their strict rules. Oregon's rules are heading that way, and the industry is pushing back with scientific data showing that there are better ways to protect consumers. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
10 days ago, a Vermont grower decided he would try to illegally deliver a supply of cannabis to an unlicensed operator in New York. Posting the delivery on Instagram was probably not the smartest way to document the deal, and that grower was delivered a $20,000 fine. Jessie Lynn Dolan has more from the Green Mountain State.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Lamoille Connect presents the second annual 420 event Uplift. The event will be held at Stowe Cider from 5 to 9 p.m. with live music from Green Lion Crew, Medison, and Corey Faya. Tickets are available at 7daystickets.com. Hetty Vermont has kicked off the judging phase of its signature event, the 4th annual Hetty's Cup, featuring both home grow and adult use tracks for the first time ever. Cup organizers have rescheduled the awards party for Saturday, May 20th. On Friday, April 14th, the Vermont Growers Association hosts their monthly community discussion, The Market is What We Make It, for cultivators by cultivators. Vermont growers are also asking for a community call to action for needed reform to the cannabis bill currently taken up in the Senate. Reforms include a community reinvestment fund, much needed updates to the medical program, and expanding agricultural benefits for outdoor cultivation, as well as manufacturing income limits. For the easy-to-use campaign tool and to take action, visit vermontgrowers.org. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Cannatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at cannatrolls.com.
In Massachusetts, Caroline's Cannabis of Uxbridge is the latest dispensary operator to turn to the legal system to challenge the host community impact fees many in the state of Massachusetts have to fork over to their host cities and towns. Those fees, up to 3% of sales, can build up quickly for a successful operator like Caroline Frankel, the owner of that dispensary. PCM founder Jimmy Young has that story and a story of a former sportscaster comrade of his who got busted for possession back in 1994.
I'm Jimmy Young with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report, sponsored by Holyoke Cannabis for Weed Talk News. Caroline Frankel is a cult hero of sorts in the Bay State cannabis market. Caroline's Cannabis of Uxbridge was one of the first social equity applicants to open in the Bay State in 2019. She's earned a lot of respect from the industry because she filled out all the official forms with no legal assistance, all by herself. Needless to say, she saved thousands of dollars in that process. Now, with Hopedale added to her Uxbridge location, Caroline is suing the town of Uxbridge over $1.4 million of payments made for those controversial town impact fees. Now, the lawsuit is over a year old now, but is finally getting some attention thanks to the reporting of freelance journalist Grant Smith Ellis. Now, there is another dispensary in Haverhill with a lawsuit against that town over the same impact fees that are part of the current law. However, many believe these fees are not necessary, certainly not anymore, now that it's a few years into the legalization of adult use in Massachusetts. And many communities recognize that the impact on the community of opening a dispensary has not been very impactful at all. These fees were put in place at the start of the industry because of the novelty and the expected increase in traffic. Now it's just another business opening in another town, perhaps a sign of normalization and acceptance, perhaps. In the meantime, on Wednesday night at the Summit Lounge in Worcester, Pro Cannabis Media produced a special live edition of In the Weeds, and I was joined by Mike Adams of Planet Mikey fame. He happens to be my old comrade at New England Cable News, and he was my guest host. Now, when you've known someone for over 37 years, you think you know them pretty well. Well, Mike was actually busted for cannabis possession back in 1994, and I never got all the full details of what happened to him. And since we love to tell the stories of those who have been mistreated by society, here's Mike's story. Mike, I need to ask you a question as a talk show host and a friend.
Yeah.
And it has to do with what happened in the 90s.
Oh, geez. You mean my famous bust?
Mike Adams was busted for weed in the 90s while he was on New England Cable News. And by the way, he never got suspended.
Never lost my job.
Never lost his job, which we have to give credit to the management.
Well, I had pictures of all the management.
Of course you did.
You know,
in your office? I
thing,
don't want to go there.
Last thing they wanted to do was see those things hit the streets. But yeah, I got busted in a car wash.
Sparkle.
Mr. Sparkle in Vernon, Connecticut. I mean, this is all public record, so I'm not saying anything that hasn't been told before. You know, I used to get home at 2:00 in the morning because I lived in Connecticut.
He commuted, that's right.
The show was in Newton, Mass.
My hometown, just for the record.
So I'd get home at 2 a.m., whatever, 1:45, and I pull into a car wash. My car was a mess, and I go in there, I start vacuuming the car because it was a mess. Well, I'd forgotten that Bill Lee and others were in the backseat of my car earlier that night.
Oh, you're going to throw Bill Lee under the bus?
I'm not saying it was his or mine, but there was weed in the backseat and a little baggie. So the cop pulls up and I got the hose going. You know, it's like loud. You know how loud those vacuums are at the car wash?
Yeah, I used to work at scrubbing up a car wash.
Yeah, for $1, they make a lot of noise. So I'm in there, you know, and the cop taps me on the shoulder and he goes, "What are you doing?" I look at him, I'm like, the vacuum is lit. He can hear it. I put it on his shirt, like,
you didn't do that.
Yeah, I said, "I'm vacuuming my car." You know, and I started to go back in there. Stand back, stand back. So the officer's name is Tim Murphy.
Ooh, like the old coach. Actually, Harvard football coach is Tim Murphy.
So I stand back and he shines the light in the car, and there's this little baggie in the back seat, and it had about, I don't know, 1/4 ounce of weed in it. So he goes, "What is that? Pull that out of there." I pull out the bag. I hold it up. It's got like a bud, a couple of roaches in there, you know. Cop says, "What is that?" I'm thinking, this guy's a real moron. He doesn't know this is a vacuum. He doesn't know this is weed. I said, "It looks like pot to me," you know. Handcuffs me.
I can't believe this.
Takes me into the police station. Now, the problem with it was it wasn't that much weed or anything. It wasn't in any big trouble. but it made 8 newspapers.
Right.
Hartford Courant, Journal Enquirer, Springfield Union,
Right.
Worcester, Globe, Herald, and USA Today.
Woohoo!
In the state by state, it'll say, Oregon, man finds bisexual duck.
Right.
And then it said Connecticut, sportscaster busting. That's me. Now they dropped the charges. I had first offense status, whatever, but it made all the newspapers. And you know what the date was? April 20, 4/20,
Oh, you're kidding.
1994.
That's why I wanted to hear the whole story. I don't think I ever heard the whole story.
4/20/94. I was 40 years old.
That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report, sponsored by Holyoke Cannabis. I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News. Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
And finally, Air Wellness, a multi-state operator in cooperation with global insights platform Suzy, polled 900 U.S. consumers about their observations of the 420 holiday. And the results were interesting. A few weeks ago, we reported that one medical dispensary in Massachusetts, Temescal Wellness, is giving its employees the day off with pay. So how do you celebrate on 420? Well, according to the poll, 39% of cannabis consumers will take a personal day holiday of their own. 31% consider 420 a special occasion. 71% of respondents reported that their consumption patterns will not change on that day. And while 23% did indicate that they would consume more, how much more? The pollsters didn't ask. But it is one of the busiest days for the industry. And a good time for us to remind you that it is a whole new world of weed out there, so use it responsibly. And Pro Cannabis Media will observe 420 by not producing our weekly show next week. Instead, we will be celebrating ourselves, and we'll have a live special Green Rush Live, taking a look at some of the 420 celebrations from coast to coast and news from the day before. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Elena Pinto. Thank you for joining.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and the host of In the Weeds, and once in a while, the really live business cannabis talk show we call Green Rush on Friday afternoons from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. Now, let me tell you my cannabis story. I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weedgets filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
As a broker, we have access to many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the 3. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.